do your thing, find your niche, find your way. And then, the people who weren't for you, just move along. And the people who are for you, just be grateful because that you have them to walk the journey with. And
hey, everybody, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. Today, I am fulfilling my promise to you with another amazing success story. I've got Meg Nocero on the podcast today. Meg, thank you for joining me.
It's an honor. Thank you for having me, Mike.
So let me tell you a little bit about Meg. Meg is the founder of Butterflies Bliss, LLC, where she helps people transform to bliss. I shortened it to that. I hope that's okay. We're going to talk more about that. She is also an attorney, a TEDx speaker, and a certified happiness trainer. She hosts the Manifesting with Meg Conversations with Extraordinary People podcast that I hope to be on soon, and is an award-winning author of 3 books, The Magical Guide to Bliss, Sparkle and Shine, and her latest that just came out in September. You can get it now wherever you get books, Butterfly Awakens, a memoir of transformation through grief. Meg transformed herself after her beloved mother died from breast cancer. She left her career as a prosecutor for the Immigration and Naturalization Service. Is it still called that, Meg? Or did they change that to?
Department of Home. It's ICE. It's Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Yeah, okay. All right. Sorry, I was using the old thing.
It's okay.
Anyway, she left that career to search for the light she saw in a vision before her mom passed away. We'll learn more about that later. Meg's been featured on MSNBC, CBS, ABC News, the Boston Herald, the Chicago Tribune, Oprah, and in hundreds more places. You can learn more about Meg at her website, megnocero.com. Nocero. See, I did it wrong already. megnocero.com. megnocero.com. You can also email her at megnocero@mac.com. Instagram, Meg Nocero. Yeah, you on Twitter too?
I am. Yes, I am.
Are you there? Is that your handle there as well?
It's just Meg Nocero. That's right.
Meg Nocero. Okay.
You got it.
Her books are available on her website and Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold. Meg, I start every podcast with the same simple question, and that is, how did it happen for you?
How's it happening for me right now with my book out and 2 weeks ago? It's a work in progress. I love how, I embrace the progress, not perfection mantra. So yeah, I think that is actually how it's happening for me, is that I do look for progress, not perfection. So following that tone, I'm not holding myself to any standard that I'm not ready to embrace. So I heard the other day, I love it. It's like one of the kindergarten rhymes comes true to life. Inch by inch, it's a cinch. Yard by yard, very hard. So I'm going inch by inch and walking the journey one step at a time and getting to talk to amazing people like you and, really kind of enjoying all of the work that I put in. The actual, payoff is to have amazing conversations with your audiences as well as you.
And let's, so that's like very recent. And I thank you for that. Let's go back a little bit because like I said in the introduction, you've sort of had transformations in your life, like we all do, and those have led to where you are today. But I'm curious about, let's go back to what Meg was like as a kid. I mean, Meg, where'd you grow up? What'd you do? How'd you become Meg?
So I'd like to think that, the roots of Meg are certainly in my Italian roots. I come from a very wonderful Italian-American family. I'm very proud of that for sure. My family always instilled in us a yearning for curiosity, as well as, getting an education was really important. It opens up doors for us. We come from that immigrant mentality where, educate yourself and it'll get you to a place where you get to actually make choices in your life. And certainly I was very blessed with 2 parents who really made the choice to educate us well. And it opened up so many doors. And I'll have to say, even as a child, I kind of fought them tooth and nail because I was more creative than wanted to sit down and study all the time. That wasn't really my jam. I'll say that, as my daughter would tell me now. But the funny thing is that you can embrace both sides of the brain, left and right, the logical as well as the creative. Unfortunately, when you have certain goals in mind, sometimes the creative is, squashed, or sometimes the other side, the logic, is squashed. But as I've come into myself, the Meg I am now, I'm so grateful for that real engagement as a kid into the world of imagination, and I will have to give credit to my dad as well as my grandmother, Helen Nocero, for that. They loved the movies, and any kid growing up who got to see a world outside their door through one of those wonderful, movies. I mean, I remember one of the first that I ever saw was Gone with the Wind, although it was torturous to sit there for how many hours that we had to sit through it.
3.
It was still like, oh my God, I'll never forget Scarlett O'Hara sitting, standing on the hill at the end, saying tomorrow is another day. All these quotes still come at me. So, I was able to embrace my imagination through the lens of a movie camera, because I went to the movies all the time. That was one of our favorite places, that and theater. It was great. So how did it happen? It certainly started off by being introduced to a world of creativity.
And did you take it further? Did you have notebooks where you create scripts, or did you act out plays of your own, or that kind of thing? Or were you just sort of just,
time.
Yeah.
No, all the time. I have 2 sisters. So I had cohorts. I had, our, partners in crime, so to speak. My sisters were only a year and a half older and younger. So we were very close. We had each other. We had other kids, obviously, that we're friends with, but we're real tight as far as the threesome. In fact, my mom named us ultimately what turned out to be the Little Women. My mother was Mary Jo. My oldest sister's Mary Beth. I'm Meg, and my younger sister's Amy. So, obviously the literary world came peeking into ours, and we used to grow up, thinking that we were all the Little Women, although I wouldn't say my personality is much like Meg's. It's more like Jo, the rebellious one. But anyway, that being said, I had the opportunity to have a world of imagination come to life, because we used to put plays on all the time. We used to, present them to my parents. They would engage that,
Sure.
I used to write all the time. I used to write stories about, very successful young women. I would, back in the day, it was still under the auspices of, women were more limited than men, but my mother was like, never let that ever peek into your vocabulary, ever, vernacular, whatever you want to call it, because women have just as much opportunity as men. You're just going to have to make a different path for yourself. So, I was, and by the way, my father was outbid by 4 women in the house. So the only dogs that we had were always male. So he made sure that they were representative in the house. But, that's one of the most wonderful things, to go back and remember those wonderful times where you had, those creative moments. And we laugh because that's what builds a life, is the foundational on your memories, and certainly makes you who you are today. And I love that you asked that question. Thank you.
And were you growing up in Miami or did you grow up somewhere else?
No, I'm not from Miami. My family's actually from New York, and they moved down to Orlando. My father was stationed in Orlando Naval Hospital during the Vietnam War. That was such a strange place. We got lucky for that, because I might not be here if he was in actually Vietnam. But he was transferred down to Orlando, loved the weather down there, met another doctor while he was in the Navy Medical Hospital, and invited him to work as a cardiologist in his practice in Orlando. So, which is very, very not traditional for the family to leave, especially Italian families. They're really tight knit, and they don't like, where are you going? Don't leave the nest. But my parents did take that leap of faith. So clearly courage was something that they embraced. So to jump and take a leap of faith out of one career to another, for me, I had great examples at my side. So they started a whole life in Orlando. My father is still very renowned cardiologist there. My mother was a very huge powerhouse in the community. So, my parents made a life for themselves there. And then when I decided, to venture out to Miami, because by myself, it wasn't necessarily a fearful thing. It was more of an exciting thing of like, let me see if I can make my way, especially when I was in high school. I went exchange to Colombia, South America. I lived in Colombia, South America for a time with exchange family there. Okay. So I learned Spanish, and Miami is obviously a great place to practice your Spanish. In fact, my husband used to say to me when he first met me, who is going to have a major in Romance languages or Spanish, which was my major was Romance languages. I speak 4 languages. And, living in Miami, I'm like, do you want to reevaluate what you just said to me? Because I can talk to people in business. I don't know so much about you. You need a translator. So, it definitely served me well to make the leap to Miami after college.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask about that because I think you studied Italian and Spanish at Boston College. And my limited knowledge of what the, track to law school is typically doesn't go down just the language. Maybe you have a minor in a language and, history is but was being a lawyer on your mind when you were in college, or were you looking at something else? And
my whole point about learning languages, first of all, is I made it really hard. I would have probably been better off. I would have been easier if I just did an English major. But
that's what I did.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, it's fantastic though, right? You get to read all the great literature, the great works of literature. I was doing that in Spanish. I was reading all El-Cid, and I was reading all of those in Spanish. So, not to ever set bars, not that being an English major I would have loved to be an English major now. In fact, I yearn for those book clubs that like to talk about the great works of literature, for sure. But even having those language, the language as a part of me, my whole thing, I'll be honest with you, my parents would have supported travel if I had an educational bent to it. So I lived in Italy my junior year in college because I was an Italian minor. So I had the option to go live in another country and learn that. And I was always like, how do I break down barriers between conversing with somebody else? Communication is really important. So by learning another person's language, they feel more comfortable speaking with you. So I was always, and the people that I have met by virtue of just being fearless in opening my mouth and communicating, because I don't necessarily watch how I speak. I have been, when I was on CNN Espanol, I was like, this is not going to be in subtitles. I was like, I'm going to have to speak in Spanish. And they're like, yeah. So I was like, let's do this. So, for me, it was like, I was like, okay, well, if someone told me beforehand whether or not I was going to have to do it in Spanish, I probably would have said no. But because I had to be forced, I was like, all right, well, I guess, that's what I'm here for. I can do it. Let's do it. And it was a great experience. It broke down another barrier, another wall. So I don't feel as uncomfortable. And I'm like, it is what it is. I can express myself in many different ways. And if Italian, all I do is move my hands around a lot. And then, I'll just so, which is easy for us, right? We're very emotive, right? We emote with our body language as well. So, languages for me was, I love words and playing with words and the sound of words. It's musical. It's very musical to me. And my ear picks up on music so much better. I'll learn so much better if I have music playing behind me, which is very interesting. Different knowings of how you learn is a very interesting, endeavor to look into, and figure out what capacity you can actually retain things differently. I'll go back in time when I hear a song. I'll remember exact moments, because of that memory capture. That's just how my brain works. So when I graduated from law school, when I graduated from my undergrad, I was like, what am I going to do now? So I did apply for law school, but it was in the 90s and it was a recession, and I got waitlisted at a couple schools and it didn't turn out. So I moved back to Orlando, and I was like, well, I got to figure out what I'm going to do. And I decided to get my master's in international studies. And it was what brought me to the University of Miami and to Miami. And that opened up, what am I going to do after that? I decided to go to law school. And it's really been kind of like a process of elimination for me, and, I never dreamed of being a lawyer. I can tell you this, as someone who was bullied as a child, I am so grateful for the skills that I have to be able to, one, feel confident enough to articulate my arguments on behalf of myself or others. I'm a real, it triggers me when I see someone's not being treated like they should be, at least giving a fair shot. It'll
Sure.
like trigger every part of me. So I'm very grateful that I have that outlet to be able to help people tell their stories in that kind of setting as well.
There was something interesting you said in the middle of all that when you were describing the CNN Espanol, that I think is like a good lesson for all of us, because sometimes something that you are able to do, someone asks you to do it in advance and you talk yourself out of it, right? Because you're like, oh, I couldn't possibly do that, even though you could. But in this case, they put you on the spot. Essentially, you couldn't say no, right? So,
well, I wasn't going to. It's kind of like when opportunity shows up, and we pray for those opportunities, right? We pray to get out in front of whatever audience that we feel aligned to, and it just happens to be a different unfolding than you actually contemplated. Well, I'm not one to share, I will regret if I said no to that.
Yeah. Okay. And the bullying thing, what's that all? What was that about?
When I was growing up, it's so funny because I'm clearly a people person. I thrive with other people. And, the bottom line was I never found a real place when I was a kid, because I'm the girl who shows up with tears on. I mean, I'm not necessarily a Kool-Aid drinker. I don't follow very well. If there's something going on that is not necessarily kosher for me, I will definitely be like, no. So I did not follow, and I was called out a lot because I did not come into the fold, so to speak, from the more, I would say popular, like kids would say popular people. And, I had braces in second grade, and, brace face was a lovely tone back then. And it just fed into my insecurities, and it triggered all of those wonderful, the naysaying and the sabotage of your life as a kid. And, you watch the movies, and when I watch the movies and you see the bullied kids, the little nerds, or all, I'm like, oh, I feel the angst, it's like, back then I keep wanting to say, you're gonna be okay. You're gonna be even better. And I tell my kids all the time, you don't want to peak in high school. That is not where you want to hit your high. It's like there's such a world out there after the fact that, do your thing, find your niche, find your way. And then, the people who weren't for you, just move along. And the people who are for you, just be grateful because that you have them to walk the journey with. And for me, it took me a long time, because we all want to be liked in high or in elementary school for sure. And it was bad. It was terrible. I would have to like take turns, to avoid people, because I knew that if I passed certain people, it would be just incessant. I was just like, and it's so funny because even now I have to take account, like I have to take notice of what my feelings, because coming on certain things, you're like, oh, it could happen again. So I might like shirk from that. Oh, I'm a 50-year-old woman now. I'm like, I'll out myself. I don't care. I'm like, really? Really? We're still doing this. But the reality is sometimes those tapes do play back, especially when you're on the verge of doing something really big in your life. And like you said, like if you think about it too long, then you might not want to do it. But if you let things happen and just say, obviously the opportunity is showing up for a reason, I'm going to jump into it, because otherwise it wouldn't be here for me if it weren't. For that reason, then I do my rah-rah my cheerleading, and I'm like, let's do this, so. But I'll tell you, empathy is a huge thing, because I have a ton of empathy for people who feel, that, they'll never be enough, that there's something wrong with them, that they're never going to be able to rise above because of whatever someone told them in their past. I'm like, really? You're going to give your power away that easily? And I think a lot of leaders, for sure, the ones that are the best kind of leaders can recognize the talent, but also embrace the hangups too, because we all have them, right? We all show up with them all the time. And those bullies are still around, even at our age. They're still there. And when I see them, I'm like, you're back. And I notice, it's like, who hurt you? Who put you in those positions where you have to feel like you have to make people feel they're mediocre or less than? I never get that.
That sounds a little like the boss you had at your first law firm, as I read in your newest book, because you gave me a sample of that. He sounded like a person that you were just describing, like a person who was a leader and had, I guess, a tremendous opportunity to make an impact one way or the other. And, in your case, you describe how he chose to make the impact the other way. So your first introduction into being a lawyer was not pleasant, was not what you were expecting.
No, I honestly, and even after 20 years, and when I was in a leadership capacity in my own office, in my own, I was always really, really a big champion to figure out what makes people want to show up in their lives. And interestingly enough, I never ever imagined that someone on my team would ever be a really great asset if I put them down. I was like,
yeah.
Why would I do that? I mean, this is who I have to work with. Clearly they're smart. They made it past, all the hurdles to get to where they are as lawyers, as, as people in their career. And I was like, why would anyone want to take a resource? It is a resource because someone who could be on your team is a wonderful, and I say as a human resource, you have that whole, how can we work together in such a way that we both can shine? I don't understand people who don't see it that way. Maybe they're tired, maybe that they, feel like, they get to choose who they want to rise to the top. I don't know, but I'll tell you that much. I think it's my life lesson that I kept coming into these people, like, once again, here we are in the same situations when I was a kid. This is my opportunity to actually speak up for myself and change that narrative. That's how I see it now, but I wish I didn't have to go through it, but that's how I see it now, an opportunity more so.
And so let's talk about the I don't know, I guess this transformation that we started with at the beginning. You become an attorney for the government, for INS, ICE now, where you are actually prosecuting, I don't even know what the right thing to call people now that come into the country illegally. But let's just call it that, people who come into the country illegally.
Yeah.
And so I could see, I'm going to obviously listen to what you have to say, but I'm putting myself in your shoes, and I'm like, okay, I'm doing the right thing because these people are, they're breaking the law. But you mentioned empathy before, right? And these people are doing these things for good intent for themselves, right? Trying to better themselves. You have to protect the law. You actually, I would imagine your language skills came in really handy when you were doing that. But I guess ultimately, it sounded like, when I read about it, it sounded like you went from being super excited about it to eventually, it just kind of wore you down. Is that,
No,
can you
it
take
did.
me through that? Yeah.
Yeah, it did. I think there's a shelf life to litigating cases, and I will be honest with you, especially if you're doing it on a daily basis. And I think people forget that what we fill our minds with on a daily, does in fact permeate our skin, and they'll get into our very being. And I think that at the time I was handling cases for almost 20 years, and you hear stories, and they're mostly asylum. Certainly there were cases where individuals had done really bad things as far as criminal cases were concerned. So it did really get under my skin after a while. And especially the whole loss of my own mother, I didn't have the wherewithal to hear other people's stories the same way because of how depleted I was at the time that I had gone through walking her final life journey with her when she passed away, and then having to go back to work again and going back into cases where people were talking about how, whether it's true or not, they're still talking about how their families were murdered in their country of origin, or something really terrible happened. And the rape cases were just so difficult because you had to ask those hard questions, at the same time balance it against whether the person's credible or not. And after a while, I didn't want to not believe anybody anymore. You become very jaded, and I didn't want to lose that balance, that fair and balanced approach to my life as well as to other people's stories. So, I do believe that, after almost 20 years, it was just too much for me. The empathy factor, because I used to take away days like when people won cases, sometimes I would hug them. It was like they would come up to me. I would never, I feel that there is a decorum you have to keep, but they were like the happiness and the joy. Sometimes they look at you as if you're the person keeping me from this happiness and joy. And that's another factor. I'm like, I want to be happiness and joy in this world. I don't want to have people walk into court and look at me like they're terrified. That was another thing that did bother me after a while. But I did take the public service component very seriously. I felt it was a very high honor of mine to be able to serve my country in that capacity. I did see it like that. I took an oath of office. When we sign up, you take the oath. So, and also to protect the border. Also, there's some people that are not nice that come over, not just economic refugees, and they do terrible things. And I had to listen to these terrible things. So over a long time, it does chip away at your resolve. And I guess you get to question, you have that choice or question whether this is something I want to continue doing, for sure.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, you actually put it really well, because it doesn't just get into your mind. You said it gets into your body and into your skin,
into your body,
right? And everything. And I thought to myself, yeah, when you're in an environment where you're just so used to people not being truthful to you, you can't help but become the person who just doesn't accept people at face value anymore, because you've been burned maybe too many times, right?
Oh my God. And the fact of the matter, and I love that you pointed that out as well, is my children hated it because I don't believe anything that they're, especially the teenagers, right? I'm like, you can't lie to me. I was like, I've been studying body language and how people are when they start about to tell some whoppers, I'm like, this is not going to happen well for you. But the reality is that you don't want to have to show up all the time questioning other people's motives and their reason for telling you certain things, and trust, that becomes a very important thing. Integrity is another important thing for me, and that joy, it does take away from that as well, that joy factor.
Yeah, there's no joy.
Not when you're not like, if I were sitting here analyzing your motives for having conversations with me or whatever, it's not an exciting experience. It'd be more like, why, other than, being here in conversation with you, just experiencing, your story as well as mine. It's a different complete experience. And I wanted the different experience. I didn't want the same before. I wasn't the judge. I was the prosecutor. So I was the one pulling apart the story. The judge is the one that makes the determination as to whether or not, one side made their case or not. And, it's funny because before I left, I was contemplating actually going into that role, which, may have been a better role, but I was so burnt out that I was like, I can't do this anymore. I just can't. I was having anxiety attacks literally in court and had to bring myself back into my body because I was taking a flight of creative notions and while I was sitting there, which is not a fun experience, by the way.
And that's, so I didn't really think about that. If you had become a judge, a lot of people think, oh, that's great. A judge is like, a wonderful position, but maybe it just actually escalates the anxiety, because as a prosecutor, you're making a case. If judge doesn't agree with you, okay, you move on, right? But the judge has to live with every decision that he or she makes, right? And you make wrong ones, no matter, you make wrong ones, and it's hard to, Anyway, so this vision that I mentioned in the intro, can you talk to me about the vision?
So when my mother passed away, I have to tell you, I never believed she was going to die. She was 67 years old. She was completely fit before she got before she had cancer. And I was sure that there was something that we all could do to help her, and she could help her. Like, she did everything, nutrition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we were at her bedside, and she was very, very sick, very ill. She had just done her last round of chemo, and chemo is a bear. I don't know if you've ever experienced anyone who's had to go through that. It is life depleting. I know certainly it is a life saving for a lot of people, but after a certain point in time, sometimes it outweighs the good it can do to a body. And she certainly was undergoing those effects. Well, she was pretty much in a induced coma, and we were praying over her one particular evening or morning, actually, and I had a vision of a lighthouse, and it was very strange because it was this really beautiful lighthouse. It was not a normal lighthouse, and there was a beautiful blue sky. You know what it reminded me of? I don't know if you've ever seen the vistas of Santorini in Greece, where those they have the white caps. You guys will all have to go look at it. It's absolutely stunning. There's pictures of Santorini in Greece where they have the white roofs, and it's against the blue skies. That's what I saw. And then I saw a burst of light, and I felt her say to me, "Let me go." And I was like, oh my God, this can't be happening. She can't be going. And then when I opened my eyes, I looked at my dad and my sister who were there with me, and I said, she's going, and she had passed away not even moments after. And I was not just in shock, I was devastated. I certainly wasn't ready to accept that reality. And fast forward, I never let the lighthouse go. And I certainly was like, why am I seeing a lighthouse? Why is that what she shows me? Why is that, in so many words, the last visual she gives me with the words, let me go? And being a wordsmith, I just held on to it. I wanted to know, but she wasn't there to tell me why anymore. Why would you show me that? It's like, how'd that happen? Why are you showing me this? And I had to go find out for myself. And that really was after I had to go through, obviously, the shock of grieving. After that, I had to turn around and, really evaluate what I wanted next, because she also told me when she was able to speak that overwhelming stress will kill you, and regrets are not something you want to have at the end of your days.
And okay, so that's pretty powerful. Now, what did you do with it? So you had this happen. What did you study on it? Did you think about it for a long time? Did you take immediate action because you just knew that, there was a new path for you? How did you navigate it?
Well, with the lighthouse, it always is in the back of my mind. I wasn't sure, why this image was the last I would experience in her living presence, because she was still alive when she gave me that visual. Certainly, the beautiful part about paying attention to signs, and I will say this to anyone who is really contemplating a major life change, or anyone who pays attention to their surroundings, or anyone who becomes really intuitively focused as to what it is that they want, their intention, etc. The beautiful thing about signs is that we can interpret them however we choose, and someone other than me may have just, okay, I saw a lighthouse. Oh, I'm crazy. I'm just, okay, that's it. Or because I'm such, and I will say this, I'm like the kid when I was a kid. Why? I would always say, why? Give me an answer to that. Why is this happening? And because I'm that why person, I wanted to know why. And what ultimately happened were answers to my questions came to reality. So for instance, I was introduced to the works of Paulo Coelho, and I started reading voraciously. I would not, being the literature guru or English major that you are, that, books are the open to another world for so many people. And I was trying to answer my why through someone else's words. So I would look to any kind of book that really spoke to me. And that ultimately is what happened with the result of my magical guide to bliss. I wrote a guide for myself, but one of the gurus of my guide, I would say the mentor that I've never met, and I would probably pass out if I did meet him, is Paulo Coelho. And he wrote a book called The Pilgrimage. And in The Pilgrimage, he walks to a place called Finisterre. And in Finisterre, it means this world meets the next. So traditionally, many people would take this spiritual pilgrimage to Finisterre, and at the end, they would burn their clothes in a ritual as if they are leaving all the past behind and embracing their future, because they really believed that back in the day that there was the ocean at the end of Finisterre and there was nothing else. Like the world was flat back then, right? It wasn't a round world that, and they really believed that is where this world met the heavens. And when I saw the lighthouse at Finisterre, I was like, oh my God, that's the lighthouse I saw. Whether it was unusual, it was different, it was that. And I was like, well, I have to walk that. And I don't know, I have to figure out, maybe my why will be answered on that walk. And I didn't know when I was going to go. I didn't know how I was gonna that was gonna happen, but I was definitely determined to answer that why. And that is what I got, my message at the end. But reality is so funny, because even if you look back into his books, The Alchemist, he always says, you might travel the world to find your answers, but they're right beneath you the whole time, right? But you have to see what the lesson is. And that goes back to the whole bullying, these opportunities in life, they show up over and over. So you learn a lesson so you can get past it. And a lot of the how did it happen comes up because you figure out you're strong enough to move on to the next level or the next call in your life. And that answer to that question becomes the answer to your why.
I love how you said that we can interpret signs however we want. That's a very powerful statement, because so many people are always searching for what a sign means. And I don't think a lot of people feel like they necessarily have the power to decide what it means and then move ahead with whatever that decision was, because who can say that's not what it was?
Yeah. Do you ever ask yourself when you're doing your shows, this person is showing up in my life and I'm curious as to the why? So go back to, like, say, the whole, Shakespeare, all the world's a stage, right? And people come in and out of your stage, right? Every day someone shows up and they offer you perhaps like the answer to the riddle so that you can go on to the next stage of your life, right? Yeah. The question is that, are you paying attention? That was the whole idea behind my TED. It was like, wake up. People are showing up all days in answer to what you're asking for, your prayers. But sometimes we don't recognize it because we're not paying attention. And that key to your financial success, to your relational success, to your any success might be showing up, knocking on the door, and you just don't want to answer it, because you're like, I'm too busy doing something else. And the
or
fun
they must
thing
be
is,
they must be at the wrong door.
That
They
too.
must be at the wrong door. Yeah.
Why are you bothering me? Or but it's like, hello, signs are what they are, and they can be just completely there, or we can interpret them to have some greater meaning. And you've heard of many people who have done really great things in their lives, and that's because they answer that call, those signs, in a certain way that whatever they needed, they take it as the interpretation and they use that to their benefit to empower them further, which I find fascinating. I like human spirit is just amazing to me, for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you have to be looking for it. You have to recognize it, and then you have to open the door. You have to let it in.
Right.
It's a 3-step process. and
you don't want to stop.
Not everybody wants to take all 3 steps, right? Yeah.
Well, you might need a breather before the 3rd step. If you need a break, you need to take it, relax a little, just, relax a little, and then
fair enough.
And go for it. Yeah, fair enough.
Did you start writing your first book? By the way, the way you describe it in your closet, you live in a condo, you you talk about your writing room, you didn't have a writing room. And so you actually, I thought I saw a picture, I think, of your first thing in your closet, which that was very sweet. But it also was just, it struck me as another thing, like, oh, I don't have a place to write. I can't write. I don't have a place to write. Yeah, well, here's a place that I made into my writing area. But did you start writing your first book before you left your job as a lawyer, or did you wait and just, it was a clean break and then get started?
No, it's been a 10-year process.
Yeah,
My first, I will say the beginnings of my first book, if you're talking about The Magical Guide to Bliss, it came from, talk about finding a place to write. I used to, so I have tinnitus, which is a loud screaming in your head. And I have it very managed now. Yes, it's in your ears, right? Ears, right. But it doesn't necessarily come from your ears. It could actually come from your nervous system just showing up as if it's a sound in your ears, because I have gotten every test, my hearing, my ears, they're fine. I mean, my hearing may be a little bit more damaged because of the damage from the ears, from the ringing, but there's no abnormalities in like my MRIs or anything. So it came out for me as an issue with my nervous system. So I had to figure out, which is baffling, is something that's so, intangible, and having to actually have I had no one can fix me with a pill. I had to actually go within to calm myself, which is for type A crazy person, like I say crazy awesome, person like me, where I have to settle down, So how I decided to settle down was I would get on a stationary bike and ride for 30 minutes. It settled my head, to be quite honest with you. I say endorphin kicks, like for exercise, you find an exercise that speaks to you and you can actually calm yourself. And I was right. I would write what would come through my mind so I could hear better. So talk about not having a place to write. I found an exercise bike in our gym, and every day I would show up with a book, with my journal, and with my pen, and I would write every day. And I would share what I wrote, and it turned into my 366 insights of the day. So I basically wrote myself a guide to lead myself to a place where I wanted to go rather than I had to go. So like I didn't get stuck. I didn't feel stuck. So that started November, that started soon thereafter. And my mother passed away. She passed away in April of 2011. So it's coming up on 11 years this next April. But even the memoir, I was taking it all in as I was experiencing it, because that was the only way I could control what was happening around me. It felt too heavy. It felt too much. So if I put it in words on the paper, I felt like I could hold on to some sort of reality at the same time, not get lost in the anxiety of what was actually unfolding, which, for me is very effective, especially because I'm prone to anxiety attacks. The creative brain just goes off on its way, and I can't really grab on to the logical side, which is how I've dealt with a lot of that. A lot of multiplication tables will bring you back into your body, something that'll take you away from, that's an illusion, that's not real, come back in. So for this squirrel-like personality that I have, always exercise brought me to a centering place. And I was able to write, and the writing also felt like I was being heard by myself. I was able to hear what was happening, and it didn't stay in my head. It was on the paper, so I could let it go, which, is another thing. Funny, she said, let me go. That's how I was able to do it.
So so if I heard you right, between all of that, you've been kind of writing multiple books at the same time as you just process your thoughts and write them down. I'm sure they don't go into a book when you're journaling on a stationary bike, but the fact that you get them out of your head down is not only, that's your creative process. It makes you feel better, but it also is a way for you to be organizing all these different thoughts at the same time, is what it sounded like. Am I on the right track there?
Absolutely. One of the most effective things that I ever was introduced to in my work life. It's called the mind dump. It's when David Allen suggests that, you know, every Monday you sit on your table and just to clear your head, you just put everything you can imagine on a piece of paper that you feel like you have to do. All these things that, you know, take up that space in your brain that you can be creative, just put it on the paper. You capture it and it's there, and you don't have to think about, what am I missing? What am I worried about? So for me, that has played over into business as well, how I engage in that component as well. The writing, of course, for me, you know, I've been known to take a pen and write on my hand, not to lose, you know, the idea, especially when I'm sleeping. I have a journal by my bed because I get some great stuff, you know, from my dreams too. So, you know, and I've heard it said that some of the most incredible discoveries are, you know, when you're in the shower, for one, you know, because you're like relaxing into the idea. And then also when you wake up in the morning, just, you know, compartmentalize on paper, just throw it on there, just get it out of your head and then see what's happening. And I know with Julia Cameron's morning pages, she suggests that that's the first thing you do every time you wake up is write, you know, 3 pages longhand of whatever is in your head. And there's some magic there that you won't lose because you've captured it.
I've tried that. I have to say I've tried it, and it's been very challenging for me to do that. You feel like, oh, you just get up and, you know, write 3 pages. Like that's just going to be easy and flow. And I've tried it, and I've just been, yeah, it's just a struggle. It's hard to get through it. And I suppose it's probably meant to be hard because it's a practice and a habit, just like anything. But I came up against that wall and I stopped, where it sounds like you know,
well, I will say to you, if you know, I'm brutally honest to myself a lot of times, but the whole bottom line is that what works for me then, right? Ask me if I've done morning pages and quite a bit, especially, you know, promoting my book and everything to that effect. You know, I do make it a practice to wake up. I have my second book is called Sparkle and Shine. And it's based upon my mantras, Meg's mantras. And I love doing that because for me, every morning I do my mantra practice. I definitely encapsulate it in a writing sample and I do shoot it out on Instagram because I love the visuals of the pictures. But it's something that keeps it going. It keeps it alive because I don't have a lot of time to just settle down and write, which I want to do, by the way, I want to do. But I go back to you know, sometimes there's a practice that you have done that works for you, but at certain times in your life, it might not. Doesn't mean that you can't be flexible with it. And certainly, you know, you have a book. So clearly you are able to, you know, successfully sit down and create something amazing to share with other people, certainly what you're writing and the ownership. But, you know, for me, it's kind of like embracing the, you know, possibilities that something else might work at a different time in my life, never being like fixated in one thing. So I can't grow because I don't want to berate myself or sabotage myself by saying, oh, look at you, you've come so far and you did so well. And then you just, it's all gone. But no, maybe now it just needs a different unfolding or a different, you know, iteration in my life because I've grown differently and the writing has changed and the story may have changed for me.
So with the time we have left, Meg, I want to cover 2 things. First of all, I want to explore bliss. I want to understand how you came upon that word and chose it, because it's a word that I know and I've heard, but it's not sort of widely used. And I think the second thing I want to talk about is your latest book, and I want to understand what you know, why you wrote it, what you're trying to accomplish, and how people can benefit from grabbing it and reading it or listening to it or whatever is available.
So Joseph Campbell says, follow your bliss, right? And the doors will open where the windows were shut, or the other way around, where the windows will open when the doors were shut. Anyway, I just gravitated to that. It sounds beautiful to me off the tongue. It sounds to me like something I want to strive for or even embody at times. I have had experience where I've experienced true bliss and, you know, moments in time. I don't experience it on an everyday basis, but when I do, it's when I get goosebumps, and it might be just a moment, you know, in time. But the reality is that happiness is everyone's true goal in this world. We do things because we think that they're going to make us happy. And I think that, going back to the basics, certainly the basics of why we're all here, why have I showed up on this world? Like, what's my calling? What's my purpose? That's for me, the philosophical basics of life, right? What is it that we're going to, at the end of our days, be proud of? And I think when I feel at a place of happiness and bliss, it's probably because I have engaged with others in such a way that I'm inspired and I'm woke, I'm awake and I'm conscious. And there's something really magical to be told or seen or experienced. And it's like you take this opportunity, this once around that we all experience, and you really took it and made something of it for yourself that aligns with you. And my bliss might not be yours, Mike, and might not be another person's, but I honored that. I honored that part of me. And I think happy people, want other people to be happy, and hurt people want other people to hurt. So if I'm yearning for that, state of nirvana, I don't know if some people call it that, or just really contentment that I'm in this world doing something of service, and not just like my parents were very, 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 focused on the fact, just don't be here to take up space. Nobody owes you anything, right? You need to come to this world, take those gifts that God gave you. And I will say God, my terminology, I use that. And, don't waste it. Don't waste this opportunity. So certainly Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey he writes about, and the whole idea that what movies do we love more than anything? Maybe Star Wars, and it's all built upon that archetype. And at the end you're like cheering the guy on. Like, I want to cheer other people on like that. That is a bliss. There's nothing better for me than, back to the movies, going to a movie and at the end going through that whole drama with somebody and then coming out the other end just feeling elated. It stirs that emotion in you where you can be like, the possibilities of life, how wonderful, right? I love those movies. I truly believed when I set out to write my third book, Butterfly Awakens, that for me, and I'm talking about that negotiation process we all have in our, internal mind, the whole, okay, I did not want to live when my mother died. I did not want to go on. I had tinnitus. It was maddening. I had insomnia that was driving me crazy. I felt like, oh my God, this can't be the rest of my life. And I don't have her. And she was truly a champion for me. Like, she was a place where I could go to have the conversations that excited me, that were blissful, right? And I had 2 kids at the time. I still have 2 kids, thank you God, 2 and 8 years old. And I turned around and I looked at my life and I said, I can't do that to them. So I better figure out how to save myself at that point, right? How to turn this around. Because for me to live like that, coming from a place where I was a happy, joyful, creative, imaginative person, was unacceptable to me. I just couldn't imagine. I had a lot of help, by the way. I had a lot of people who showed up in my life and didn't let me stay where I was, in that dark place in my closet. So the closet became somewhere that, was isolating. And then it became somewhere where I started writing, right? My journey of writing. So I was able to reach out to other people through my words. So I promised myself that I would be vulnerable with my story. When I walked through it, I had to have a good ending, because remember, yay, in the theater, I want everyone to cheer at the end.
The hero's got to win, right?
Yeah, the hero's got to win. I was like, I will not buy into this, archaic, perhaps, film noir, where people like felt like I don't feel good still after I watched it.
Why did I come here? Yes.
I wanted, my life is still, the journey keeps going. After I finished the Camino, I'm still in this life. And I have good days and I have bad days, but I'm able to take the lessons learned from my own hero's journey and share them with others. Because for me, the evidence showed that I'm stronger than I thought I was, going back to the law background, and I can make an argument for my life now. I can make an argument that, there are hard times, we have losses, we go through periods of pandemics, and we don't know why, this is happening, but there is always a silver lining for me, and I'm going to find it. And one of my favorite things I ever heard anyone say about movies is the best movies are when you end and the conversation begins. So what I wanted for my book was, for when the last page is done, I wanted the conversation to begin, that there's hope in transformation, there's possibility if you keep walking through the grief, the pain, whatever challenges come up, and that your story is going to impact someone else.
Well, first off, thank you so much for the wonderful explanation of bliss. It was just amazing to watch you and listen to you kind of go into that whole thing, because I thought, there would be some sort of, rehearsed, like, bliss is whatever you say in your, but it wasn't that. It was actually like you took us through the whole exploration to get to why it's so beautiful. So thank you for that, and thank you so much for sharing not only what happened to you and the reason you wanted to write the book, but also the message of hope that we all need more of. And you can, you can come out of very traumatic, very difficult circumstances, and you can move on, and life can actually be better as a result of the experience that you went through. So everything is an opportunity, even when it feels like, a kick in the teeth, or worse, or ringing in the ears, or whatever,
Oh God.
whatever else
Oh
it
Lord.
might be. Meg, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story with me and with everybody listening. It's really been a pleasure to get to know you a little bit better, and to experience you, I guess, is where I'll leave it, because experiencing you is joyful.
Thank you.
I'll just say it.
Thank you.
Now, I let people know at the beginning how to get a hold of you. I think I covered that, but do you want to reiterate anything? Do you want what do you want people to know, if anything else?
You did a great job. I'm so grateful to those who support Butterfly Awakens. If you need, certainly more inspiration, email me. I am a big cheerleader too. I think that that's a beautiful thing when you have walked through a certain journey to turn around and help others. I do believe that helping is not doing for someone else. It's just perhaps showing them that they have what they need within to grab onto, and that they're more powerful and stronger than they could ever imagine. So I definitely would open the conversation with that. Certainly, if you do feel like you're in a lost place, reach out, and I'm happy to, perhaps offer you a bit of inspiration that can turn that to something, a possibility as well.
Right. Okay. You can help them hear the knock and open the door.
Yes. Open the door. Open it. There might be some, unless you live by yourself and it's very late at night and then God knows, don't open the door.
You just have to put some safety boundaries on things.
Yes, safety limitation. Exactly. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't, because I will not ever put you in harm's way ever. That is for sure. For sure. Anyway, well, I can't wait to interview you, Mike, on my show. I get to turn it around and have the conversation and peek into how Happen began. It's very exciting.
Definitely looking forward to that. Meg, thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
You too. Thanks for listening to this episode of the How Did Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How Did Happen podcast.